I first met Costa Botes at the 2017 Melbourne Documentary Film Festival, where one of his many acclaimed documentaries was centre stage. This was before I learned that he was one half of a creative team, the other half being Peter Jackson, who crafted one of the great make-believe documentaries in film history in 1995. Forgotten Silver chronicled the life and times of New Zealand cinema pioneer Colin McKenzie, a fictional account of a fictional life that a big chunk of the New Zealand population thought was all true. Costa has written a book called Remembering Forgotten Silver, best title ever, the film that filled a nation, and he joins us to talk about this incredible piece of film non-history. Mate, thanks for joining us on Screen Space.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm thinking back, I'm thinking it was probably act of kindness that we were talking about in Melbourne, because it was before Angie, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Before we get onto the book, anyone out there who hasn't seen any of Costa's documentaries, he makes some of the most beautiful humanistic stories for film that I have ever seen. So chase them down, anyone. Incredible work. You open your book with very vivid recollections of leaving your homeland as a wee lad. How was life as a young Greek-born Turkish boy in New Zealand?
I remember it as being quite a dark, gothic sort of experience. I remember being scared all the time, confused all the time. And I sort of fairly quickly at a very young age became the interface between my parents and the rest of New Zealand society because, well, I couldn't speak any English, and that was probably why the feelings of darkness and oppression. But as I learned English and as my mastery of the language increased, my parents would tend to use me as an interpreter, and I found that actually quite uncomfortable. I was a fairly shy child, and so having to be thrust forward and talk to doctors, lawyers, shopkeepers, yeah, it was hard work. And anyway, my parents always struggled with the language. My dad wasn't too bad, but they tended to fake it till they made it. But yeah, it wasn't a particularly happy time until I was probably till I reached my teens, and then I started discovering the kinds of passions that would end up ruling my life, and yeah.
Well, there's a wonderful quote in the film, and you start off your book with it. When a character describes the moment that Colin's love of cinema was born, it was like a flash from heaven starting out of the darkness, and his whole heart filmed. I'm guessing you had a similar moment when you first felt the pull of film?
Absolutely, but not one moment, many, because my parents were probably one of the last generation of people who went to the movies as a habit. Right. Every Friday night they would go, and they didn't care what was on. Like the cinema near where we lived was a repertory cinema, and it played second-run films. And so you'd go in, and there'd be all kinds of things, some utter rubbish. I didn't like the lovey ones, with all the kissing and all that sloppy stuff. But I got to see some absolutely wondrous films, like Fantastic Voyage is probably the one that really kind of,
yeah,
and I think that one above all just made me go, how do they do that?
Yeah.
And I guess I spent the rest of my life making it my business to find out.
What part of New Zealand were you in as a child? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Wellington, New Zealand,
okay.
the capital city of New Zealand, and that's where I've lived most of my life. I spent 3 years in Christchurch and a little bit of time in Auckland, but no, I've always been drawn back to Wellington.
With that big, beautiful cinema right in the middle of town there. What's that called? The
Embassy.
The Embassy, of course.
Yeah,
yes.
It wasn't quite so beautiful. It was big, but it wasn't quite so beautiful because as I hit my teens, that coincided with the decline of all these glorious picture palaces.
Sure.
They started to smell of mothballs and decay, and people just sort of stopped going, and then they closed down one by one. And then in the 1980s, they discovered that multiplexes could bring people back. Sure. Well, multiplexes are not the same. I used to go to see the James Bond movies at a huge theatre called the thing that I can't remember right now. It was a big old ballroom, and the GIs from America would go there and dance, but it was also a cinema. And I just remember being dumbstruck by looking up at the ceiling, and it was all different colors, and and then you had the waterfall fountain and all that lovely kind of romance. And seeing, for instance, James Bond films there, it just sent shivers up and down your spine. That's the way to see a movie, man.
Yeah. I managed to catch the tail end of the great George Street cinemaplexes here in Sydney as well, and I've got fond memories of seeing Raiders of the Lost Ark at the Paramount and things like that. And it's just they're wonderful memories that Generation Sense just don't have, which is sad.
Yeah, as opposed to looking at Raiders on this.
Exactly right. Yeah. Watching Lawrence of Arabia on the phone. If they're looking at Raiders, most people, after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, most people sort of aren't talking about Raiders too much. Still one of the great films. Let's talk about the genesis of Forgotten Silver. What inspired the story of Colin McKenzie? Where did it conjure from?
Well, to be absolutely honest, it was inspired by a very short paragraph that I read in a movie magazine that you might know of called Cinema Papers.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And they did a special issue devoted to Bruce Beresford. And they basically did a retrospective, and they ran through all the films he'd made. And tucked at the back of this retrospective was a list of short films that he'd done, including one that he did at the British Film Institute when he was working there. And it was the title that caught my attention. It was The Cinema of Raymond Fark, F-A-R-K. And I thought, hang on a minute, Raymond Fark? And then it said a biography of the forgotten genius who made such classic films as CIA Swamp Virgins. And then I thought, no, that's definitely a lead pull. Now, it would be many, many years before I got any more information about that. And I found out that it was actually scripted by Clive James.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
Kind of clever Aussie.
Witticism, yes.
But that was the tiny little seed that went into my head. And I thought, wow, that's a really good idea. That you'd make a biography of a fictional filmmaker.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be great, I thought to myself. It didn't actually specify, and because it was only a tiny blurb, I thought, wouldn't it be great if we fabricated all his films or parts of? And that was the original kind of impetus. And I wrote it down, and then I forgot about it for a couple of years because I thought, no, it's crazy, I'll never get that done. And anyway, a couple of years went by, and I thought, well, it's a good idea. I mean, hell, I should just write it anyway, even if there's absolutely no chance of getting it made. It might be fun to just write. So I started, and it was during that process, sort of after a couple of months of just jotting down ideas, that I was talking to Peter Jackson and just told him what I was doing, and he immediately got excited about it, and he said, we should do it. And I went, what do you mean we? Well, I can help. I can produce it. I can blah, 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 blah. We never really formalized it, but from that moment on, we just both kind of went at it. And it tended to be me coming up with original ideas that Peter would then make hell of a lot better. Is that clever? He's not Peter Jackson for nothing.
Well, that's exactly right. Yeah, and I'll jump ahead to the question I'm going to end with, actually, but I will raise it here. At one point, I started to think so I sort of realized that Colin McKenzie could be the yin and yang of you and Peter, because your career path became that of a truth seeker, of embracing documentary as your preferred narrative form, and whereas Peter became consumed by the need for spectacle and grandeur, and that was going to lead into my question about collaborating on this film. Which
it's very kind of you not to refer to me as a hopeless failure, Simon.
No, well, I had that written here originally, and then I got rid of that. But I did. I think we're both idealists, and absolutely, we did right into the character aspects of our personality. Sure.
Peter has got massive drive. He stops for nothing. And if he has a vision for something, he pretty much stops at nothing to realize it. I don't judge the results. Well, I do a little bit, but whereas my own interest, when I was at art school, my professor actually said to me, Costa, I think your talent lies in sort of small scale, intimate, personal dramas. And I was very offended by that at the time. He was dead right, absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's sort of the sort of things I've pursued. So of course, I'm not going to have the big career with with that, but that's okay. What matters to me is what matters to Peter, which is even though I'm working on a very different scale, I'm absolutely driven to achieve the vision and the ideas that I have, you know, and I don't take kindly to anyone who wants to deflect me from that, you know.
Yeah,
so I think we absolutely share that quality. We just, you know, have different interests, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Film, it's been called a mockumentary, but it's not a mockumentary like Spinal Tap or The Ruttles, which are clearly meant to be comedy variations on the doco film. The film that this most reminded me of was Woody Allen Zelig.
Yeah.
Were there films that you love from which you took inspiration? Because it's a very small pool of movies that exist like this.
Yes, there were. There was an English. Well, we didn't have the word mockumentary back then, but
No,
in,
exactly.
in 1976, there was an English TV production that played on our national TV, and it purported to tell the true story of disappearing scientists. So all around the world, these rocket scientists were just, where did they go? Who knows? And an enterprising reporter sets out on a mission to discover their whereabouts. And by the end of the story, he's found out that there's a secret base on Mars, a secret base on the dark side of the moon, and that they've discovered alien life on Mars. And where these rocket scientists have gone is the moon base, you know.
Wow.
So, and I remember it was called Alternative 3, and you can actually watch that now on YouTube. But yeah, that made a big impression on me because it's got that same quality that Forgotten Silver does, where I'd call it queasy, where you're just not sure, you know, and you think, no, this has got to be a leg pull, and then something happens that goes, oh, hang on, it must be real, is it? I thought it was something up until about halfway through when I looked at the calendar, and I realised it was April 1st.
Ah, yes.
And then I kind
That's
of
always a giveaway.
That's a great joke, you know. And the other thing that I vividly recall is that the next day at school, everyone was talking about it. Everyone was arguing about it. And I'd be saying, no, of course it's rubbish. Of course it's fiction. I'd go, no, it's true. And, you know, that does make an impression on you. Like, so that sort of stuck in. Films like Zelig and Forrest Gump, they came along later, and by which time Forgotten Silver was already, you know, we'd already got the concept and large parts of the script. So they just sort of confirmed the validity of what we were doing, but they weren't sort of stylistic markers. I mean, we couldn't do what they did. I remember being quite envious of the beautiful effects in Zelig, for instance, and ditto Forrest Gump. But we just did what we could do, and it sort of all turned out.
So let's talk about that aspect of the film. It premiered in late '95 on TV1 in their very popular Sunday theatre slot, and then the nation was utterly spellbound by Colin's story for a little while, anyway. Yeah. And then, in real terms, when did the backlash against what I guess was perceived as what? How would you describe the backlash? Was it claims of dishonesty or anti-nationalism, or was there something to it?
Yeah, you name it. They came after us with knives. I think people just got really angry that their television service had lied to them. They took it really personally.
Wow.
And I think what we did, really, our sin was to dangle this great national hero in front of them, and they all went, yes. And then somewhere around lunchtime of the next day, the news broke that, no, it's a hoax. Such an ugly word.
Well, it is an ugly word. That suggests that you and Peter set out to trick people into thinking it was real, but that's not true at all, right? Was it? No, yeah.
I mean, come on. Colin McKenzie makes a tryst with Soviet Russia and the mafia. He makes his own film out of beaten flax and stolen eggs. come on,
2,000 dozen eggs. Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah. And so our assumption was that people would see through it relatively early and then just sit back and enjoy the comedy. But no, I think the sort of secret sauce, unfortunately, was, I mean, fortunately, he was great, but Leonard Maltin, having him in the film, and he's a reputable, well-known international personality, people just switched off their brains. They just assumed that, oh, it must be real because Leonard Maltin's there.
He's talking it up, sure.
He's talking it up.
I as I said to you before we started recording, I watched it again this morning. It contains a couple of the funniest lines I've ever heard in cinema. Even the poorest members of society had some leisure time, which I still think is hilarious.
Oh, you like that? That's great.
And the scene to secure bridging finance from Stalin's Russia, Colin had to, quote, remove all religious references from his biblical epic.
His biblical epic, yeah.
I just think that's the funniest line ever.
Yeah.
And of course, my other favorite part is when he invents sound film and then he films Chinese people but didn't invent subtitles. That is, I just think that's quite brilliant. But
my favorite line is the reference to Salome quitting her occupation as a prostitute and turning to union collective bargaining. I can't remember the exact line, but very socialist, you know.
It does crack me up. Having said all that, and those beautiful small little moments, it looks like the production was not a small one, and I think, excuse me, and I think that goes some way to explaining why it convinced people that, you know, people started to believe it was true, because you stage scenes in Gallipoli trenches and the battlefields of the Spanish Revolution, and you outfit the whole Salome production. It feels like a small film, but then it also took on a certain grandeur of its own in the production element.
Yeah. Well, I think we have to thank Peter for that. He was incredibly quick and efficient in terms of taking minimal elements, extras and little bits of set and whatever, and there was a good deal of planning beforehand to again just make the most of very little.
Sure.
And you know, it was quite targeted. We didn't have vast resources, but what we did have, I think we used really well, and you got a sense of scale, and also the crew and other people were willing to go the extra mile and put in a few extra hours or resources, you know, so we got a lot of bang for the buck. Sure. But the other big factor is the film was very modular. We didn't have to create, you know, huge battles in detail. We just needed to create little moments. So the Gallipoli trench was basically a 30-meter trench that was dug that morning and dressed and whatever, and also using existing locations. Like we shot in this god-awful ex-quarry where there was garbage everywhere, you know, like piles of slag, and it looked very much like a bombed out battlefield, you know, but we didn't have to make it. It was just there. The most expensive shot, and I think it consumed probably a tenth of the film's entire budget, was an effect shot where we had 200 extras, and then using digital trickery, we just moved them around like a jigsaw around the location. So suddenly we had did it 7 times. So we had 1,400 battling extras.
That was the fight sequence on the steps of the on the front of the temple. Yeah,
ancient Hebrew, ancient Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Completely fictional event, but anyway. I was very proud of that because we were going for D.W. Griffith, you know. Now, when you look at a real D.W. Griffith, you know, Birth of the Nation, that huge, not Birth of the Nation, is it? Which one is it?
10 Commandments or?
I can't remember. It's the one you see quite often. It's got these gigantic Babylonian elephants. And we were going for a semblance of that, and I think you know, we got
absolutely.
You know, it's impressive. I remember the first time we showed the film and it got to that shot and the whole cinema just erupted in applause, and I thought, yes, we did it.
All right, I guess finally, writing the book, looking back on this period of your life, how have these recollections helped you put it into perspective? Has it changed your mind about certain elements? Did you remember moments of the filming that you'd long forgotten that you were able to work into the book?
No, I was surprised at what I was able to remember, actually.
Yeah.
I put off writing it for quite a while because I thought, oh, will it be interesting enough? Will it,
Oh.
and will I remember anything? And then I was in hospital and just bored to hell. And I asked my wife to bring my laptop in, and I just started tapping away. And
Wow.
after a day, I had 20 pages, and I thought, okay, well, I can do a couple of hundred more. And the other thing was, I sort of made an executive decision. Originally, it was going to be largely a photo book, and Chris Code, who took the photos, did some gorgeous work. But I regretfully had to kind of drop that idea because photo books are very expensive, and I just don't think there was probably a market for it. And I didn't intend to make it a memoir, but I thought, well, if I don't, then I can't explain where all these ideas came from. And so I started doing it, and it felt natural. So I just kept going, and I did remember lots of stuff. And then, of course, I had 30 odd interviews with cast and crew, and they would jog my memory about things. And so I quote them at length.
Sure.
It was a bit of a mission getting Almighty God himself to sit for an interview, but he did give me a few hours, and that's good because he had interesting things to say, talking about Peter Jackson. He's a co-creator of the film, and it was important to get his perspective on it, which I think I've honoured that. Yeah, and I don't know. Now it's done. I'll write something else.
And I'll read it because Remembering Forgotten Silver is the film that filled a nation. Is a terrific read, and is an extraordinary look inside the creative process. Excuse me, for a film like this, and also into your creative process. And I'm very thankful that you gave us that insight. So, Costa Botes, where would you like us to buy the book? I know it's available through Amazon. Is there a preferred seller?
After a couple of weeks of just experimenting, I'd say Amazon would be the best bet. I did have another service, but I'm not finding their prices or their delivery times particularly helpful. So I think Amazon, and of course that's worldwide. So if you've got Australian Amazon, amazon.com.au. Yep. You've got amazon.com UK, Canada, sure. US, whatever. So it's available on there, and currently it's available as both Kindle, which is a thriftier way to get it, and you can order a paperback, which they print, and it looks pretty good.
Wonderful.
I'd show you, but I haven't got it in front of me. So
not at all. You sent me a PDF, which was very kind of you, and I'll be certainly picking up a copy of the book to have in amongst my must-read making of collection here at home. So, Costa Botes, thank you so much for your time, mate. It's such a joy to talk to you, and I'm very thankful that my life has crossed paths with yours over the years, because you're a rare talent, and it's a joy talking to you.
Oh, thank you very much. That's great to hear.
Thank you, mate.